Need for Speed is a racing franchise that is created by Electronic Arts that's been around since 1994, and it mainly centers around illegal street racing. Need for Speed as a franchise has over 150 million copies sold across all games, not counting games that were released as free like MMOs and mobile games. And out of all of the games, Most Wanted 2005 is the most sold in the franchise with over 16 million copies across all the versions it was released on. So far, the franchise has released over 20 titles, and a total of 21 developer studios or companies have either made, assisted, ported, and or remastered at least one entry. And the most recognizable studios throughout the franchise include EA Canada, also known as EA Vancouver, Black Box, Criterion Games, and Ghost Games. While the franchise mainly centers around illegal street racing, there has been a few games that center on legal street racing, whether taking place in a racing festival or in a professional racing environment. The franchise is divided into multiple eras. The first is being the classic era from 1994 to 2002. Then there is the Black Box era, also known as the Golden Era to some fans of the franchise, from 2003 to 2007. After that, it's the Identity Crisis era, also known as the Dark Age era, or the Experimental era, where multiple developers were making Need for Speed games around this time, from 2008 to 2013. And lastly, we are in the Reboot era, or could also be called the Modern era of the franchise, from 2015 to today. The various types of cars that have appeared in the franchise, regardless of what game or what they have offered, include supercars, sports cars, hypercars, pickup trucks, SUVs, tuners, muscles, police cars, race cars, almost anything that you can think of. Need for Speed is one of the few racing franchises, if not the only racing franchise, to never feature a motorcycle in gameplay. But there has been two rare instances where a motorcycle was present in Need for Speed games, on two games. The most known of these is the BMW S1000RR that is seen in Need for Speed Heat, in the cutscenes. And the other motorcycle involves going through the files of Need for Speed Carbon, where you'll find mentions of a Honda CBR 600F4. 2005, 2009, 2010, 2011, 2015, and 2017 are the years where multiple Need for Speed games were released in the same year. Underground Rivals and Most Wanted in 2005, Need for Speed Nitro and Shift 1 in 2009, Need for Speed World and Hot Pursuit in 2010, Shift 2 Unleashed and The Run in 2011, No Limits and The Reboot in 2015, Need for Speed Edge and Payback in 2017. While the franchise is mainly an arcade type of the genre, there has been 4 Need for Speed games that were released as actual arcade cabinets. Those being Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2 under the name Need for Speed, and Need for Speed GT from 2003 to 2004, Need for Speed Underground 1, Carbon, and most recently with Need for Speed Heat. There was an exclusive deal between Electronic Arts and Porsche where Porsche would be appearing exclusively in Need for Speed games, meaning that no other racing franchise could have Porsche in their games. And unless if a developer or a publisher was willing to pay more money to not just Porsche but to EA to have them in their games, this deal only lasted from 2000 to 2016. After that, anyone can feature Porsche. Throughout the 2000s into the mid-2010s, RUV was the most common manufacturer that game publishers and developers would use in place of Porsche because of their exclusivity deal with Electronic Arts. But RUV has never once appeared in a Need for Speed game. Another manufacturer that has never made an official appearance in Need for Speed is Saleen, specifically with the Saleen S7 that has appeared in the 2014 movie, but not in any game. That's right, there was a Need for Speed movie that was released on March 7th, 2014, during the year of the franchise's 20th anniversary, and its main character is played by Aaron Paul, the same guy that you know as Jesse Pinkman from Breaking Bad. If you mod the PC version of Need for Speed The Run to include Tier 5 and 6 cars in the campaign and drive on the Avalanche race of the final race of Stage 5, you'll be able to see a suicidal text whenever you're driving on any of the falling boulders that are coming to you. That text was meant for a cut campaign mode that would have included you driving Tier 5 and 6 cars. It's also possible to get the text with Tier 4 cars, but it will take a lot of practice for you to do it, and depending on what car you're driving with. Need for Speed Hot Pursuit is the only game in the franchise so far to receive a remaster, being released 10 years after its original release. Need for Speed Rivals is the only Need for Speed game to receive a complete edition re-release that includes all of the downloadable content that was released during the game's lifecycle. Some Need for Speed games have received a mobile port at some point, but 2 mobile games are exclusive for mobile devices, those being Need for Speed No Limits and Need for Speed Mobile. The franchise also has 2 MMO games, those being Need for Speed World and Edge, with both Edge and Mobile being released for a particular market in the world, specifically China, with one of them eventually will be getting a worldwide release. Need for Speed has released at least 1 game every year between 1997 and 2013, except for 2001. But there was a game called Motor City Online that was originally conceived as part of the Need for Speed franchise, but later on, it became separate as its own thing. And much like Motor City Online originally being conceived as part of the Need for Speed franchise but eventually became its own thing, there's 2 other games that are branded as Need for Speed games but they're not Need for Speed games. Those being Need for Speed V-Rally and V-Rally 2. Released in 1997 and 1999 respectively, V-Rally and V-Rally 2 have the Need for Speed branding and name to help it get more sales in North America. Or lack for better terms, EA distributed the first 2 V-Rally games in order to give it a bit more popularity for the series. And it's only in North America for the PlayStation 1 versions of both games. And depending what region of the world you're from, and depending what console you got the game for, it might have been branded as something else, either standalone or under another series like Test Drive. Majority of the games in the franchise feature police. Some games are only there just to chase you, other games allow you to obtain police vehicles and use them in some capacity, and 5 particular Need for Speed games have a bigger emphasis on the utilization of the police. Those being Need for Speed 3 Hot Pursuit, High Stakes, Hot Pursuit 2, Hot Pursuit 2010, and Rivals. Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2010 has 3 very unique police vehicles. The most unique out of these is the 911 Speedster, being the only car in the entire franchise to not have a roof whatsoever. The other 2 are unique in terms of how odd they are in terms of having a regular police siren and how their doors open, with the SLS AMG having gold wing doors and the Ford GT having most of its roof open with the doors. The franchise is mainly known for featuring internal combustion engine vehicles, but never electrical vehicles. That's not to say that no electric cars have ever been featured in the franchise, because there are 3 games that do, those being Need for Speed Nitro and Most Wanted 2012 with the Tesla Roadster, the original, and more recently with Need for Speed Unbound with the Porsche Taycan, and the Lotus Evija. You can also find fictional cars throughout the franchise, whether it's vehicles that you can drive with or in traffic. And there's also some unusual vehicles that you don't expect to drive in a Need for Speed game, whether if it's for a race or in a mission, like a semi-truck known as the Mack Attack in Need for Speed Payback, and not actually a car or a vehicle per se, but a literal T-Rex that you can Jurassic drive in Need for Speed 2. There has been various characters that we played as in Need for Speed games since Underground 1, which include the player for the Underground series, the player for the Most Wanted Carbon series, the player in Carbon Own the City, Ryan Cooper in Need for Speed Pro Street, the player in Need for Speed Undercover, Jack Rourke and Mad in Need for Speed The Run, Zephyr and Fate in Need for Speed Rivals, the player in Need for Speed 2015, Tyler Morgan, Sean Mac McAllister, and Jessica Miller in Need for Speed Payback, and your own custom character in Need for Speed Heat and Unbound. Payback, Heat, and Unbound are the only games so far that allow you to play as a female character, whether if it's a character made for the story or a character that you can create and customize, physically and in clothing. And out of all of the silent main protagonists that you play as in the franchise, Ryan Cooper is the only one to have an actual name. And out of all of the protagonists that you play as in all of the Need for Speed games that have a story, both Fate and the player from Undercover are actually police officers, with one of them ending up losing their job at the end of their story. Hot Pursuit 2 is the only game in the classic era to not feature the Cockpit View camera for most of the versions that it was released on. It can be found on the PS2 version, but only on certain Ferraris for certain missions. Those being the secret events number 31 and 32 that you'll find in Ultimate Racer, and or in Championship mode if you complete the 30 events for each of those modes. And the Ferraris in question that will have the optional camera view will be the F50 and the 360 Spider. In addition, in the PS2 version of Hot Pursuit 2, for either fully completing Ultimate Racer or Championship mode, you will be rewarded a secret cutscene. The cutscene revolves around a woman that's driving in a 360 Spider at nighttime, which is the only time that this game will be set at nighttime in some capacity, being chased by the police, stops at a roadblock and turns around and leads the cops into another direction. Some speculate that this is the cutscene that plays after you complete event number 32, regardless of which mode you did it on. Some speculate that this cutscene leads up into the game's intro, where you see the 360 Spider and the Murcielago at daytime being chased by the police. But really, the purpose of this cutscene was just to use as a test for Blackbots to utilize on how cutscenes will look and test out the CGI and FMV for Underground 1. And this same cutscene was also used as the intro cutscene in the beta of the game. In terms of open world Need for Speed games, Underground 2, Carbon, and 2015 are strictly set at night. Most Wanted 2005 and Undercover are strictly set in the daytime. Need for Speed World, Most Wanted 2012, Rivals, and Payback have an actual day and night cycle. Hot Pursuit 2010 also has a day and night cycle, but its free roam is separated into its own mode. Heat and Unbound also have a day and night cycle, but they're structured differently. In Heat, you get to choose when you want to go out, whether you want to go out at daytime or nighttime. In Unbound, you are going to go out in the daytime first, and when you go back to the garage, it will be set at nighttime, and you'll go back out at nighttime, and it will repeat the same cycle over and over. In 2021, 5 Need for Speed games were delisted and have its servers shut down. Those being Need for Speed Carbon, Undercover, Shift 1 and Shift 2 Unleashed, and Need for Speed The Run. And as it stands as of 2024 with one of these games, Need for Speed Carbon is the oldest game to have its servers open the longest officially. Exactly 14 years and 10 months since the game's release in 2006. Need for Speed No Limits is currently the most updated Need for Speed game as of 2024, with about 9+ years worth of content that was made for that game since its launch in 2015. Manufacturers in this franchise vary like this: newcomers, old-timers, some that came and went and never came back, and others that came back. But there are 2 manufacturers that stand out the most that have the same common opinion, those being Honda and Toyota. Honda appear as far back as the very first Need for Speed game with the NSX, but never throughout the rest of the classic era. But in the 2000s, they have a problem when it came to illegal street racing and appearing in games that have such theme. But they did end up appearing in Need for Speed Underground 1 and 2 because there were no police present in those games. Skipped out in 2005 and 06 with Most Wanted and Carbon, and reappeared again in Pro Street, and disappeared again in Undercover, only to come back in the Shift series. So on and so forth until they decided to be cool with the police appearing in racing games from 2015 onwards. In 2017, Toyota started to opt out in every racing game, no matter what it was, unless if it was centered around motorsports. But then eventually the main reason was because they did not want to be associated with illegal street racing in some way, just like what Honda was doing in the 2000s and the early 2010s. Back in 2019 and 2020, the official Need for Speed Twitter/X account roasted Toyota for that choice. But Toyota recently has started to reappear more and more in other racing games except for Need for Speed, not counting Need for Speed Mobile. Ferrari was also another manufacturer that did appear in the Need for Speed franchise, disappeared for some years, and came back in more recent entries. Their history goes like this: they appeared in every classic era Need for Speed game, started to become MIA in every game from Underground 1 to Most Wanted 2012 except for a DLC expansion for Shift 1, and then started to appear in every game from Need for Speed Rivals to today besides Need for Speed Payback. There are multiple reasons as to why Ferrari's presence has been all over the place. At times, Ferrari is very picky as to what racing games they want to appear in, especially in games that involve illegal street racing with customization. And other times, EA just could have come to a licensing agreement with the manufacturer to be able to have their cars in their games, which includes Hot Pursuit 2010, which would have been perfect for Ferrari to be in. They appeared in Shift 1 as a DLC expansion pack, as unlike Pro Street, the Shift series is geared towards more to the professional side of motorsports. Something that Ferrari was accustomed to appear on in games like Forza and more recently at the time with Gran Turismo. And regardless if customization was a big presence or not from Rivals to today, Ferrari still agreed to be in those games, only on the condition that customization must be very limited visually for the cars. 3 warp pipes can be found in the Wii U version of Most Wanted 2012. All of these center as a Mario Easter egg where you'll find 3 pipes with 3 cars, 1 each, and you'll find a car themed after 3 Mario characters: Mario himself, Princess Peach, and Yoshi. Pro Street, Shift 1, and Shift 2 Unleashed are the only 3 games in the franchise to feature real-life racetracks. And in particular with Need for Speed Pro Street, it features a racetrack that no longer exists in real life, that being Texas World Speedway. And this is only one of 2 racing games that have ever featured the track in some capacity, the other being NASCAR Legends for the PC in 1999. And unlike NASCAR Legends having the track set in the 1970s, Pro Street is the only game to have ever featured the track in a modern setting. Much like how Dub Magazine gave a contribution to Midnight Club 3's development, Road and Track Magazine gave a helping hand to Electronic Arts to make the very first Need for Speed game, hence why the title, Road and Track Presents The Need for Speed, is the way that it is. The Blue Supra from Need for Speed Carbon was intended to be the hero car until it was replaced by the M3 GTR from Most Wanted due to the popularity the car and the game got during Carbon's development, which makes the inclusion of both cars confusing from a story standpoint. The Battle Machine Mazda RX-7 from Pro Street that can be seen in the game's intro and in trailers and promotional material never appeared in the game. Likely due to time constraints or not enough time to make the car prevalent in the game itself, and its troubled development along with Undercover's development, the car can actually be seen in other games, being Undercover and Need for Speed The Run. There was a live-action trailer made for Hot Pursuit 2010 that had the Pagani Zonda Cinque, the cover car, and a Lamborghini Murcielago in its SCPD livery. The Reventon couldn't be included due to the rarity of the car, and the Zonda was actually a prototype that Pagani provided for that trailer. While Need for Speed Undercover has its own city and map, its standard definition version uses the Rockport map from Most Wanted, but remade to fit in with the setting that Tri-City Bay was going for in the HD version. Both Need for Speed Edge and Mobile use updated versions of maps seen in other games. Edge using Redview County from Rivals and Mobile using Palm City from Heat. Palm City in Hot Pursuit 2 is called Palm City Island, that is set on a tropical island with tropical canyon cliffs and forests. And Palm City in Need for Speed Heat takes inspiration from various locations from the states of Florida and Georgia. Underground 2, Carbon, Heat, and Unbound feature closed circuit tracks that are accessible for certain events, and some are accessible on free roam. The racetracks are Bayview Speedway in Underground 2, Palm Motor Speedway in Need for Speed Carbon, Palm City Raceway and Marston Speedway in Need for Speed Heat, and the Kennedy Test Track in Need for Speed Unbound. Pro Street and Most Wanted 2012 are 2 games that feature a prototype of a production car and the actual production car in the same game, with the GTR R35 and the 918 respectively. The remaster of Hot Pursuit 2010 manages to bring back every vehicle that was featured in the original game, both in base game and DLC, except for 4 cars. Those being the Mercedes-Benz SLR McLaren 722, police and regular version, the Sterling Moss, and the Carbon Motors E7 concept car. The absence of both SLRs is because of a licensing dispute between Mercedes and McLaren as to who is the owner of the car. And Carbon Motors was just simply because they don't exist anymore. And if you still want to have a complete experience of the original game in the remaster, you can always bring these cars back in the PC version through modding. At least with the SLR McLarens, I couldn't find a mod specific for the E7 concept. The franchise has had at least one entry for every PlayStation console since 1996. That also includes the handhelds. And they have also have one entry for every Xbox console that exists so far since 2002. On the Nintendo side, they've only been on every console between the GameCube to the Switch since 2002, and handhelds included, regardless if it's a new entry or a remaster so far. Majority of the games in the franchise take place in fictional locations that take inspiration from places in real life, mostly within the United States. There are 5.5 Need for Speed games that take place in real-world locations, post-classic era. Those being Need for Speed Pro Street, Shift 1, Shift 2 Unleashed in various cities and tracks across the United States, Europe, and Asia. The run within the main continental land of the United States, which includes cities like San Francisco, Las Vegas, Chicago, and New York City. Need for Speed Nitro takes place in various cities across various countries that include Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, Cairo, Egypt, Madrid, Spain, Singapore, and Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. and additionally with San Diego, California in the DS version. And lastly, Hot Pursuit 2010 also has real-world locations that are only exclusive to the Wii version, those being Chongqing, Dubai, Rio de Janeiro, and Las Vegas. Pursuit Tech are weapons or abilities that cops and racers use on each other to either escape and defend or take down an arrest. While Need for Speed 3 Hot Pursuit, High Stakes, and Hot Pursuit 2 were the early games that Pursuit Tech started their presence, with subsequent games that follow only being with the police, the tech had a bigger role on Need for Speed Hot Pursuit and Rivals, where both sides can utilize the tech on each other. The tactics and weapons include EMP, ESF, Jammer, Shockwave, Shock Ram, Spike Strip, Stun Mine, Turbo, Helicopter, Roadblock, Kill Switch, and Auxiliary. Now, auxiliaries are abilities that only racers can utilize in Need for Speed Heat and Unbound. They are considered Pursuit Tech, but not to the level of what Need for Speed Rivals and Hot Pursuit have. Auxiliaries include Repair Kit, Damage Reduction or Impact Protection, Damage Increase, various nitrous refills, Radio Jammer or Disruptor, Kill Switch Jammer, Undercover Racer, and Getaway Driver. Found on the Prima Guide for Need for Speed Undercover, Rose Largo and Gregory G. Mac McDonald have affiliations with past Need for Speed characters, those being Rachel Teller from Underground 2 to Rose, and Jonathan Cross from Most Wanted to G-Mac. Most Wanted 2005 and 2012 have something in common when it comes to its main rival opponents, and that is their lists. Though, both are structured differently, with the Blacklist having 15 opponents while the Most Wanted list has 10. To be able to face any of these opponents in 2005, you have to complete a certain amount of milestones and a certain amount of events before you can go up and compete against the Blacklist racer. Blacklist members have a set amount of events. The first 10 involve you having 2 events. The next 4 after that will have you to do 3, and with Razor himself, you have to do 5. And depending on the member, you'll be doing different types of events. For the Most Wanted list, all you simply have to do is just get enough speed points before you go up and race a Most Wanted racer. And every racer only has one event, which is just simply a sprint race. And after that, you have to go and shut them down to get their car. You can also get the cars from the Blacklist members, but that's in the off chance if you find the right marker that has a pink slip. While the Blacklist is set in stone for 15 members, the Most Wanted list gets to be expanded from 10 to 14, unofficially. And that's due to the DLC packs that the game has received throughout its life cycle, with one car out of each pack being part of the Most Wanted list. But there is an advantage that 2005 has over 2012, and that is customization. Meaning, every car in the Blacklist has personality and instantly recognizable to who it belongs to. In Most Wanted 2012, they're all just white. Literally, base color. No personality whatsoever. Even the M3 has a white base color instead of silver. Of course, there's some that have liveries on them, but they're straight from the factory. However, on the mobile version of Most Wanted 2012, not only you will have a different Most Wanted list, but all of those cars there have personality, meaning they have custom liveries. Also in the mobile version of Most Wanted 2012, it has 3 cars that were actually cut in the main version of the game, those being the Hummer H1 Alpha, the Jeep Grand Cherokee SRT8, and the Chevrolet Corvette C2 Stingray 427. Most Wanted 2012 was actually supposed to be Need for Speed Most Wanted 2, a direct sequel to the 2005 game. Throughout the years, there has been videos, screenshots, and early beta builds of Most Wanted 2012 that show that it was supposed to be a completely different game. Some of the cut content that was found from the game files and the beta builds of Most Wanted 2 would include a cut story mode, customization, cut cars that never made it into the game, and some new Pursuit Tech weapons that you could have utilized. Now, for the story, it's unknown exactly if this was supposed to continue after the events of Carbon, which is Most Wanted's sequel story-wise, or this would have been an alternative timeline after the events of the original Most Wanted. Need for Speed games have gone through different types of styles for their cutscenes, most common being done either in CGI, live action behind a green screen, or done in-game. Underground 2, Carbon on the City, and the Nintendo version of Need for Speed The Run had their cutscenes stylized as a comic book, or in 2D. A cartoony style was utilized for Need for Speed Nitro that not only it appears in cutscenes, but it also appears in gameplay. and cell shading was used in Need for Speed Unbound, but unlike Nitro, which fully embraces its art style, Unbound only has it for characters and special effects, not the entire game. Helicopters in Need for Speed games do different things. They are mostly there just to follow you along wherever you're going in a pursuit until they run out of fuel. Some will drop spike strips on a determined driving path where you or the AI are going. Some will occasionally try to fly down and ping you, but only seen in Hot Pursuit 2 is they can drop explosive barrels on the road, and if you hit them, that could give an advantage to the police to come and get you. In Hot Pursuit 2010, both the original and remastered versions, you can actually EMP the helicopter. Of course, you have to be within range for it to happen, either going at such low speed to keep up with the helicopter, or stationary when the helicopter is ready to drop a spike strip. While Need for Speed Porsche Unleashed is the only game in the franchise to only revolve on one manufacturer, there was actually not just one, but two versions of the same game that also revolve on one manufacturer. That being the first Need for Speed game under the name Overdriven in Japan. The Need for Speed has its own Japanese release under the name Road and Track Presents Overdriving DX, but it also has two versions that exclusively feature Nissan. The first one being Nissan Presents Overdriving GTR for the Sega Saturn in 1996, which included Nissan models like all of the GTR Skylines that existed up to that point, a 180SX and a 300ZX. Then there is Nissan Presents Overdriving Skyline Memorial for the PS1 in 1997. Unlike the Sega Saturn version, the PS1 version consists of only Skylines, every single model that existed up to that point. And if you win the tournament mode in that version, you can also unlock the Nissan R390 as a bonus vehicle. So far, there has been 3 Need for Speed games that allowed us to have cross-play, thus being Need for Speed Heat, Hot Pursuit Remastered, and Unbound. On November 15, 4 Need for Speed games came out on the same day in different years for either a particular version or as a full release. Those being Underground 2 in 2004, Most Wanted in 2005, The Run in 2011, and Rivals in 2013. When it comes to racing games in its longest event, usually they are featured within the base game. In Most Wanted 2012, its longest event is part of the Ultimate Speed DLC pack. And it's the only game in the franchise to have such long event as downloadable content. Need for Speed Payback does not have any race type events that take place within the city streets, inside of the city, outside of the prologue in Chapter 1. And again, it's not drag, it's not drift, it's normal race type. When Need for Speed Unbound first released and before any updates were given to the game, there was a mishap that happened with the 2015 Ferrari 488 GTB. And that mishap was having mismatched OEM rims. While it has the correct rims in the front, the rims in the rear are taken from the 488 Pista. This mishap got eventually patched, and this is a complete side note, I wish there was a way to bring those rims back into the car, because I kinda like the weird charm that it had going. There's actually a PlayStation 2 that is modeled after the M3 GTR. This is a one-of-a-kind creation created by Spirit Players that was made special for Electronic Arts to promote the game at the Games Convention in Leipzig in 2006. It's bundled with 2 controllers, a copy of Most Wanted, a remote control, and 2 keys for the car, which you can actually use the keys to turn on the console. In both Pro Street and Undercover, you'll find an E46 M3 that has the Most Wanted livery, with a different color scheme. When customizing your character on Skate 3, you have the option to apply tattoos. But there are some Need for Speed logos that you may find familiar on the stylish section, which include Kenji's Bushido, Angie's 21st Street crew without the 21st Street font and text, the Black Hearts crew from Need for Speed Carbon, and the Spiral logo that you'll find on Ryan Cooper's 240SX in Need for Speed Pro Street. Back in 2001, EA and Tetsuko made a collaboration together to promote Need for Speed Porsche Unleashed, and that was in the form of sampler discs with 1/64 diecast cars. What's included in the sampler disc is a demo for Porsche Unleashed, and depending what diecast model you have, a different car will be in that sampler disc that you can drive. The diecast in question include 2 open-wheel cars and 3 stock cars, which are Mario Andretti's final car he ran in 1994, a custom Tetsuko open-wheel car, 2 special liveries for Ricky Rudd, and his regular Tetsuko livery that he ran in 2001. Specifically with the Need for Speed livery, Ricky Rudd actually did race with that livery in the 2001 Coca-Cola 600. Overall, it's a weird promotional collaboration that involves around a Need for Speed game that only centers on a manufacturer that sponsor a race car in real life that's not even the same manufacturer the game only has.